Yeah, sometimes this picture will pop up on social media where they're all gathered on the bench, all the wide receivers
Hmm.
from about 3 to 4 years ago. That's quite impressive. And speaking of which, you guys caught up with the wide receivers. So what do those guys say? Hey, we're the best group in the country. We're not working on anything. What's what do they have
Well,
to talk about?
and Jeremiah, Brian Hartline was asked like, what is he working on, and said it's the stuff, just stuff you may not even see yet. One of it's kind of like just being a more vocal leader. He's just a sophomore, but they want him to speak up more and bring along the younger guys, even though he is still a younger guy. But this room is so young that he's now a veteran. He's played a bunch, but things like that. And he said a lot of the stuff you wouldn't even notice on film because it's so minute and it's so finite because he's already very talented, but he's not just trying. He's certainly continuing to get better. But you may, unless you are a technician of the position, you may not even notice it. But I thought one of the interesting questions was Jermaine Matthews made it to interviews this week because he missed when it was the defensive backs, and he was asked to name a receiver that we're not talking about enough, and he said Carnell Tate. And this is a guy that maybe we I don't think we do talk enough about because we talk about Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Ennis is coming on, and now Mylan Graham is finally going to get to play, and Quincy Porter just lost his black stripe. And you got old Carnell Tate there, who's going to be probably one of the best receivers in the nation, and caught 50 passes last year for 700 and some yards, and he's almost an afterthought. But I promise you, he's not going to be an afterthought this year. And everything that coaches have said about Marvin Harrison, or just the maturity of all of these guys, that list that I mentioned, they also said it about Carnell Tate, and I think people need to remember that.
Yeah, I'm sure their site, Buckeye Huddle, has the same videos that we have over on Bucknuts with interviews with Jermaine Matthews and all of the wide receivers. I mean, I think they gave us just about everybody, every scholarship wide receiver down, Dejai Jones, however you say that, Dezie Jones, uh, Philip Bell, Quincy Porter, then Bryson Rogers, and all the way up through Ennis, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. I don't know if I'm missing one or two in there, but we got them all. So no shortage of video. Then also yesterday, we got the specialists, John Furlman, the long snapper, Nick McLarty, the Australian who got to punt like one time last year, Joe McGuire, who was the starting punter, also from Australia, and Jaden Fielding from right here in the good old US of A, the kicker. I guess, Tony, he said that he was dealing with some type of injury during the Michigan game, and that's why he struggled and missed a chip shot in there that obviously could have changed the outcome of that game and changed the course of human events. I mean, let's say they go on and beat Michigan, and then something wacky, they take a different path than the path that they had to get to the college football playoff. Maybe it didn't work out, but hard to imagine a tougher path than the one that they had. So I don't know, but maybe there'd been some complacency if they'd entered as Oregon did as the Big Ten champion.
Yeah, I don't think it's, yeah, you don't want to change anything about the way things happened last year because talking to one of the questions I was asking at the NFL Combine was like, what was the turning point of the season? And it's like, it was the Michigan game that turned everything around. And if that didn't happen, then, maybe they just go through the motions like Oregon did. And they continue to believe that they can't be beaten, even though they lost to Oregon earlier in the year. And so that was a meaningful loss, and they made the most of it. And you see the results. I think Jaden Fielding, he may have said that he was banged up from like week 3 of the season, and he was just dealing with that. And if you remember the 3 kickoffs out of bounds against whoever last year, like right in
The
a row.
kickoff debacle. One of
Yeah,
their blowout wins, he's kicking the ball out of bounds.
and I think that was injury related as well. But always good to get it, touch base with the specialists because we've seen literally nothing of them other than some punting. And at that point, you're only watching the returners, not the punters. And when the thing about watching the punting, the balls get hit in the rafters of the WAC. So they try to catch them and try to do a mock return. But half the time the balls are bouncing around in the rafters, so one of the coaches just has to throw a ball up for the returner to catch. So, and they don't really do like any kickoff returns at this point, and they don't do much during the fall camp because it's a lot of contact, and so you've got to protect yourselves. And so special teams, they do still exist, and I think everybody expects them to be better this year because whoever is punting will be better than they were last year. You would assume Jaden Fielding healthy has got a ton of experience, so we'll see how that goes. And John Frelman, the long snapper, has returned, and if nobody knows who you are, then you're doing a pretty good job as a long snapper, and I think he did that last year.
I got to think at some point Ryan Day has assessed this wide receiver run and thought, how do we, being the national champion, they certainly are doing well at other spots, but this is just unprecedented practically and ridiculous to just say, okay, how much of it's Heartline, how much of it is the offense that we run and the quarterback play we've had? How do we try to replicate this type of recruiting and development at all the other positions?
Yeah, that is a tremendous question. And I know that David's got the question on the screen there about Cris Carter and what potential role he might have. I don't think he's there for any kind of lengthy permanent time. He's a guy that kind of pops in and out. He's very busy. And he lives, I think, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, is where he calls home, and he helps out with one of the high schools down there, as I recall. I'm not sure if he's still doing that, or if he's involved with the 7-on-7 stuff that's kind of proliferated down there. I'm not sure, but I don't think he has any kind of formal role. I think they welcome him with open arms as a elder statesman of the game whenever he comes around, and somebody who's lived life, obviously, and had some great life lessons along the way, kind of like Maurice Claret was there yesterday after practice, talking with different people and players. And I think it was Dom Taberry from Channel 10 was sitting there with him and one of the current players. And they were kind of chopping it up. Dom's been around since the 70s. Maurice, played in 2002 and was around a little bit in 2003. And then, the current players, have to listen to these stories and different things and different perspectives. And I think it's all good for these guys to hear, what the real world out there is all about. So I think that's Cris Carter's role as much as anything, life coach, and some receiving tips when asked about it, if somebody wants to bend his ear or get his 2 cents on it. But I don't know that there's a formal role for him. I guess that's something that Ryan Day can answer. I think they welcome him, the few times a year that he's able to make it to practice or come to a game. He is front and center right down there, with everybody. So he's very much welcome. And obviously, this became because of Urban. Urban was a GA for Earl Bruce and was assigned to work with the wide receivers. And he and Cris Carter became, as Cris Carter described, best friends, at that point. So, and their relationship has continued, in the decade since then. So that was kind of his entree to come back and be a part of the program. His son, Duran, obviously was with the team. I think the latter stage of the Tressel era, perhaps, or I don't know if that overlapped with Fickle and Meyer. I'm not sure. But at any rate, they're just happy to have him around again as a guy that the players can, talk to, and he can provide some counsel to some guys about what he sees as well.
Yeah, he's been around for years, and he's not the only, as Steve said, he's not the only former Buckeye that stops by. I mean, every practice you're going to see somebody familiar. But I do remember years and years ago, maybe a decade ago or so, Cris Carter was at a practice, and he was helping somebody out, and I put it in like my practice notebook that Cris Carter was showing somebody something. And then it got brought to my attention that that might be an NCAA violation because only coaches can coach. And it's funny to think how far we've come now that, Cris Carter showing somebody, get your feet down or, get your hands up. That's a no-no. But now the good thing now is you can have unlimited coaches. And so, they've got 4 guys helping on the offensive line. and Devin Jordan is Brian Hartline's right hand man on with the receivers. And so, it wouldn't surprise me if they continue to bolster the coaching staff. I think they will, but Cris Carter, like Steve said, he's got a lot going on, and there was a big to do, and LaCharles Bentley was tweeting some stuff with some former players, and people were wondering, is he going to be on staff? Is he going to be on staff? It's just Buckeyes coming back, paying forward, paying back, all of that stuff that you always hear about, because they've all gotten their own experiences. And LaCharles Bentley's got tremendous experiences. Cris Carter does. Maurice Clarett certainly does. And you bring in a Troy Smith or a Terrell Pryor, like all of these guys have been through it and more, and they all have value that they can add.